King Charles VII of France and Agnès Sorel. Two names bound together by passion, power, and scandal. Their story isn't just a romantic affair whispered about in the shadows of medieval courts. It's the story of how love became a weapon, how desire reshaped a kingdom, and how one woman dared to break every rule that confined her. In the grand halls of 15th century France, where kings were expected to marry for alliances and keep their hearts locked away, Charles VII did something unthinkable. He fell in love, not with a princess, not with a noble woman of strategic importance, but with Agnès Sorel, a woman of minor nobility who would become the most talked about figure in all of Europe. She would be called the most beautiful woman in France. She would be hated, envied, and feared, and she would change the course of French history. But before Agnès Sorel entered his life, Charles VII was a very different man, a broken king, a monarch who barely believed in his own crown. When Charles inherited the throne in 1422, France was on its knees. The 100 Years' War had ravaged the kingdom for generations. English forces occupied Paris. The Burgundians, supposed French allies, had sided with the enemy. And Charles himself was mocked, dismissed, ridiculed. They called him the King of Bourges, a bitter joke referring to the small city where he held what little power he had left. Even his own mother had declared him illegitimate, claiming he had no right to the French throne. Imagine that. A king whose own mother denied him. Charles was young, uncertain, haunted by doubt. He had every reason to believe he would be the last king of a dying dynasty. The weight of failure pressed down on him every single day. He was surrounded by advisors who argued endlessly, by nobles who schemed for their own advantage, by a court riddled with suspicion and betrayal. And in the midst of all this chaos, he was expected to be strong, decisive, a warrior king. But Charles VII was none of those things. Not yet. Then came Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who claimed to hear the voices of saints. She rallied the French forces, lifted the siege of Orleans, and led Charles to Reims, where he was finally, properly crowned. For a brief moment, it seemed France might have hope. But Joan was captured, burned at the stake by the English and their allies. And once again, Charles was alone, still doubted, still fragile. This is the man Agnès Sorel would meet. A king in title, but not in spirit. Agnès Sorel arrived at the French court around 1443, brought in as a lady-in-waiting to the Queen, Marie of Anjou. She was in her early 20s, strikingly beautiful, with pale skin, delicate features, and an elegance that turned heads wherever she went. But beauty alone doesn't explain what happened next. Plenty of women at court were beautiful. Agnès had something more: intelligence, wit, confidence. She knew how to listen, how to speak, and most dangerously, how to make a man feel truly seen. Charles noticed her. Of course he did. But it wasn't just physical attraction. Agnès offered him something he had never experienced. She believed in him. She spoke to him not as a king burdened by duty, but as a man capable of greatness. She saw potential where others saw weakness. And slowly, carefully, she began to reshape his understanding of himself. Their relationship began quietly. A glance held too long. A conversation that lingered past propriety. But in the rigid, watchful world of the medieval court, nothing stayed secret for long. Soon, everyone knew. The king had taken a mistress. And not just any mistress. He was utterly, completely enchanted by her. This was scandalous, but not because kings took lovers. They did all the time. What shocked the court was how openly Charles displayed his affection. He didn't hide Agnès away in some discreet corner of the palace. He brought her into the center of court life. He gave her gifts of unimaginable value: estates, jewels, titles. He showered her with wealth and status, elevating her far beyond what anyone thought appropriate. Agnès became one of the richest women in France, and she flaunted it. She wore gowns cut lower than any noblewoman would dare, dresses that scandalized the court and set tongues wagging across Europe. She adorned herself in diamonds and pearls, dressed in fabrics so fine they seemed woven from light itself. And she did it all with complete confidence, as if she had every right to stand beside the king. Because in Charles's eyes, she did. The queen, Marie of Anjou, was humiliated. She had done her duty. She had married Charles for political alliance, borne him children, stood by him through war and defeat. And now she was expected to quietly tolerate this radiant, audacious woman who commanded her husband's heart. The court watched Marie's silent suffering, some with pity, others with cruel amusement. But Marie, like so many royal wives before and after, had no real power to change anything. She endured. Agnès, meanwhile, was doing far more than simply enjoying the king's affection. She was influencing him, advising him, pushing him to be bolder, stronger, more decisive. She surrounded herself with intelligent, ambitious men who could help France recover from decades of war. One of those men was Jacques Coeur, a brilliant financier and merchant who would become one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Agnès recognized talent when she saw it, and she made sure Charles did too. She encouraged the king to invest in his military, to modernize his forces, to stop relying on feudal levies, and instead build a professional standing army. This was revolutionary. Most medieval kings depended on nobles to provide soldiers when needed, which meant their power was always fragmented, always uncertain. But a standing army loyal to the crown? That changed everything. And Agnès understood that. She whispered this vision into Charles's ear, and slowly, he began to believe it was possible. Under her influence, Charles transformed. The hesitant, doubtful young king became a strategic, determined ruler. He launched campaigns to reclaim French territory from the English. Battle by battle, town by town, he pushed them back. Normandy was retaken. Guyenne fell. The English grip on France weakened, then broke. By the end of his reign, Charles VII would be remembered as Charles the Victorious, the king who finally ended the 100 Years' War and restored French sovereignty. And though history rarely credits her directly, Agnès Sorel was there, behind the scenes, shaping the man who won those victories. But power always comes with enemies. And Agnès had plenty. The French nobility despised her. To them, she was an upstart, a commoner who had seduced the king and now acted as if she belonged among them. They resented her influence, her wealth, her shameless confidence. Whispers spread through the court. They called her a witch, a temptress who had enslaved the king's mind with dark magic. They claimed she was manipulating him for her own greedy ends, bleeding the kingdom dry to fund her extravagant lifestyle. Some of the accusations were absurd, but some had a grain of truth. Agnès did live lavishly. She did demand gifts and titles. But she also used her position to advance policies that strengthened France. She wasn't just a pretty distraction. She was a political force, and that terrified the nobles who wanted to control the king themselves. The Dauphin, Charles's own son, hated her. The future Louis XI saw Agnès as a threat, a woman who had too much sway over his father. He despised the favoritism she inspired, the way his father seemed more concerned with pleasing his mistress than grooming his heir. The relationship between father and son grew poisonous, and Agnès stood at the center of it, whether she intended to or not. Despite the hatred, despite the scandal, Agnès thrived. She gave birth to 4 daughters, all fathered by the king. He acknowledged them, provided for them, loved them openly. In a world where royal bastards were usually hidden away or ignored, Charles celebrated his children with Agnès. He didn't just visit her in private. He lived with her. He built her a chateau. He commissioned portraits of her, immortalizing her beauty for posterity. One of those portraits, painted by Jean Fouquet, shows Agnès as the Virgin Mary, nursing the infant Christ, with one breast fully exposed. It was provocative, blasphemous to some, but utterly deliberate. Agnès wanted the world to see her power, her beauty, her unshakable place in the king's life. She became a trendsetter. Women across Europe began copying her style, her daring fashions, her boldness. She was the most famous woman of her time, more talked about than queens, more influential than most nobles. And she knew it. She wielded her fame like a sword. But fame is fragile. Power is dangerous. And in the French court, enemies waited for any sign of weakness. In early 1450, Agnes became pregnant again. Her fifth pregnancy. She was in her late 20s, still vibrant, still deeply embedded in the king's world. But this pregnancy was different. She grew ill, weak. The birth was difficult, and afterward, she didn't recover. She suffered from severe abdominal pain, fever, and relentless nausea. The court physicians tried everything, but nothing worked. On February 9th, 1450, Agnès Sorel died. She was only 28 years old. Charles was devastated, completely, utterly broken. The man who had finally become a strong king, who had reclaimed his kingdom and ended a century of war, collapsed in grief. He ordered a lavish funeral, far grander than what was customary for a royal mistress. He commissioned a magnificent tomb for her, adorned with her effigy in marble, her hands folded in prayer, her face serene and beautiful even in death. He mourned her openly, refused to hide his sorrow, refused to let anyone diminish what she had meant to him. But even in death, Agnès Sorel wasn't safe from her enemies. Rumors spread immediately. Poison. It had to be poison. A woman that powerful, that young, doesn't just die. Someone must have killed her. Suspicion fell on the Dauphin, the future Louis XI, who had every reason to want her gone. Others whispered about rival nobles, jealous courtiers, anyone who might have benefited from her death. But there was no proof, no trial, no justice. For centuries, the mystery lingered. Was Agnès Sorel murdered? Or did she simply die from complications of childbirth, as so many women did in that brutal era? In 2005, more than 500 years after her death, scientists exhumed Agnès Sorel's remains. They tested her hair, her bones, searching for answers. And they found something. Mercury. Massive amounts of mercury in her system. Far more than could be accidental. Mercury was sometimes used in medicines at the time, but the levels in Agnes's body were staggering, enough to cause the symptoms she suffered before she died. So was it murder? Or was it a well-meaning but fatal treatment prescribed by doctors trying to save her? The evidence leans toward the latter. Mercury compounds were used to treat parasitic infections and other ailments, and Agnès may have been dosed with them during her illness. But the ambiguity remains. We'll never know for certain if someone deliberately poisoned her or if she was killed by the very people trying to heal her. What we do know is this. Agnès Sorel's death changed everything. Without her, Charles VII withdrew into himself again. He never took another mistress. He never loved another woman the way he loved Agnès. He continued to rule, continued to win victories, but something vital in him had been extinguished. The spark she had ignited was gone. His son, Louis XI, eventually took the throne, and he ruled with ruthless efficiency, consolidating royal power and crushing noble resistance. But he never forgot Agnès Sorel. He resented her memory, tried to erase her influence, but he couldn't, because Agnès had done something that couldn't be undone. She had proven that a king's mistress could be more than a secret indulgence. She could be a partner, an advisor, a force that shaped policy and changed the course of history. After Agnès, the role of the royal mistress transformed in France. Future kings would openly acknowledge their lovers, give them titles and estates, allow them to wield influence at court. Madame de Pompadour, Madame du Barry. These women followed in Agnès Sorel's footsteps, using beauty, intelligence, and political savvy to carve out power in a world that tried to deny it to them. And it all started with Agnès. She wasn't just beautiful. She wasn't just the king's lover. She was a woman who understood power, who seized it with both hands, and who refused to apologize for wanting more than the world thought she deserved. She lived boldly, loved fiercely, and left a legacy that still echoes through history. King Charles VII was a man shaped by war, by doubt, by betrayal. But Agnès Sorel saw something in him no one else did. She saw a king, and she made him believe it too. Together, they transformed France. He reclaimed his kingdom. She redefined what it meant to be a woman of influence in a world ruled by men. Their love was scandalous. It was passionate. It was dangerous. And it was real. In the stone halls of French chateaus, in the painted portraits that survive, In the grand tomb where Agnes lies in eternal beauty, their story endures. A king who loved too openly, a woman who dared too much, a kingdom forever changed by their affair. This is the story of King Charles VII and Agnès Sorel, the maiden who captured the crown, the lover who became legend, the woman who proved that power doesn't always come from bloodlines or battlefields. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone make you smaller. Her life was short, her impact was immense, and her name will never be forgotten.